Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here, and welcome back to the Sword and Sorcery Saga series. And today we're going to be taking a look at The Maze of Peril by John Eric Holmes. So while this is not like strictly a work of sword and sorcery fiction, it is most definitely a work of appendix in fiction. And given the kind of broad scope of this series, we are going to include it. One might make the argument that this is the most appendix in fiction. This book, more than probably any other I've ever read, feels like you are reading the exploits of a bunch of player characters sitting around the table playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And that really is what this is. Famously, this book and its characters were created to tell the stories that were created around the table while John Eric Holmes and his kids and friends were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And that is exactly what it reads like, warts and all. Oftentimes when we read fiction that is based on RPG games, such as like the Dragonlance, the original Dragonlance series, you don't really get that sense because the characters in the books are just too perfect. They make all of the right choices most of the time, or they make logical choices. And as those of us who play D&D a lot, we know that players hardly ever make like right choices. They hardly ever make logical choices. There's a lot of goofy choices. There's a lot of poor decisions made. There's a lot of just kind of like goofing off at the table, and this book captures that feeling perfectly. Another thing that this book is a perfect example of is a book that, while not particularly well written, it is pretty entertaining. I would say that this is one of the most just kind of like purely entertaining fantasy novellas I've ever read. It's not great. There are definitely some issues with it. There's some weird pacing. Even though it's short, it does feel a little long. There are some weird things that I would say that the main problem is its pacing and its actual writing. The prose just isn't very good. So for those of you who are familiar with John Eric Holmes, he needs no introduction. But for those of you who aren't, maybe a brief introduction is needed. If you aren't familiar with him, I bet you are in a roundabout way. So he was kind of an instrumental part of early D&D development. He worked as some kind of editor on Dungeons and Dragons. He was seen as the editor slash compiler, creator, modifier of the D&D basic set from 1977. He wrote for Dragon Magazine. He wrote in like the Greyhawk and the Blackmore settings. And he also, according to Wikipedia, created the Wereshark character, the Wereshark monster, which the Wereshark is a prominent monster in this book here. So he has been kind of tangentially involved in the D&D hobby for pretty much like his entire life. And he has a series of stories that he has written, and this is, I think, a collection of a couple of them, or maybe this was written as a novel. But he have Zareth, the dark elf, and Boinger, the halfling fighter, which is kind of a weird combination, and Murray the mage. Now, Murray the Mage in this book is actually he calls himself a second level wizard. So there's a lot of weird kind of like gaming meta things or anachronisms in this book. There's another character named Sir Geoffrey. He is a knight who speaks in really poorly written Old English, which is odd. You can definitely tell that was like a character, a player who thought that would be cool to speak like I don't know. I can't do Old English, but ye and thous and stuff. It's pretty funny. And then there's Brother Ambrose, who is like a very blatant Christian cleric. I never really imagined Christians being clerics, but I guess that makes sense given the background of Gary Gygax. You know, he was Catholic. But yeah, the cleric in here is like a Christian priest, basically. And then you also have an Amazon warrior woman who rides a unicorn. You can tell that these characters were created by players. But let's read the back of this book here. What race or races built the maze no one knew. In the opinion of the sages of Caladan, many layers of dungeons and underworld were laid down, one on top of the other, as the world crust was formed, so that now no one knew or even guessed how many levels extended below the surface. Corridors of wealth. They were also tunnels of deadly peril for many of the rash adventurers and soldiers of fortune who set forth for the secret entrances were never heard from again. To those with the courage and ability to survive the challenges, however, the maze had always paid equal tribute with its fabulous mysteries and treasures from countless civilizations. Now the Dragonites, creatures part human, part frog, maybe they should be called like the Frogonites or something, seek to keep these riches for themselves and extend their domain to the surface. It falls to Boinger, the halfling and his companions, in the midst of their quest for personal glory and wealth, to discover the Dragonite stronghold, challenge their warriors and wizards, rescue a kidnapped friend, preserve the waterways of Amazonia, and perhaps save the world. Okay, super fun sounding. And based on that, and based on like the first 50 pages, you would think this was kind of like a mega labyrinth, a mega maze, a mega dungeon type adventure. But at least half of it also takes place in a city setting. It's an urban adventure mixed with a dungeon crawl. And to tell you the truth, I think the book really shines during those urban moments. So the beginning of the book, it starts off with a group of characters, an adventuring party led by Boinger and Zareth, and they go into the dungeon, and everything goes wrong. They have a terrible time. It's a tragedy. It's a complete disaster. And so they escape back to the city to regroup and kind of reform their party. And then they get involved in kind of these weird, almost Fafhrd and Grey Mouser-like thieving exploits in the city. And there are 2 chapters about this bungled burglary that are incredibly entertaining. Some of my favorite like urban fantasy that I've read, and by urban fantasy I mean urban adventure in a D&D setting, not Neil Gaiman style urban fantasy. But Zareth and Boinger, they have to infiltrate this mage's tower to steal this crystal ball so that Murray the Mage can utilize its powers. And they end up just completely botching the robbery. They use a basilisk as a biological weapon, and they accidentally turn a flesh golem into a stone golem, and the stone golem chases them around, wreaking havoc around the city. And it is really, really entertaining, incredibly fun, funny, and just kind of exuberant. It has this real sense of childlike adventure and joy during those chapters. And I wish the rest of the book was that good. There are still things that are good about it, but those 2 chapters really stick out and just really shine. And the rest is just a little bit dull in comparison. When they go back into the maze of peril, they kind of end up discovering there is this somewhat Lovecraftian god, kind of like Dagon. They might actually name check Dagon here, but it's definitely kind of like a Deep One's elder god who is controlling things. And but the adventure ends with them, or it climaxes with them inside the dungeon. So I really like the middle part in the town. I thought was fantastic. The 2 bookending dungeon parts of those 2, I liked the first one the best. The third one just kind of, or the last part just kind of starts to feel a little long in the tooth for what the book has to offer. But overall, I greatly enjoyed my time spent with The Maze of Peril by John Eric Holmes. When was this published? So it's kind of a weird publishing date, because I think these are probably kinds of stories that were probably in Dragon magazine and then later collected. Copyright 1986 by John Eric Holmes. But yeah, if you're looking for something that really reads definitively reads like a Dungeons and Dragons module, like a novel written with participation from player characters sitting around the table, then you're really going to want to check out The Maze of Peril. If you prefer your fantasy with a bit more of a more serious edge, or something maybe a little darker, or maybe just a little more less having that player agency from around the table interjected and into the story, then you might want to avoid The Maze of Peril. Personally, I had a really good time with it, and I'm going to try to find some other things that John Eric Holmes has written. Unfortunately, a lot of his stuff seems to be somewhat hard to find these days. So yeah, but that's it. Just wanted to do a quick review of The Maze of Peril for the Sword and Sorcery Saga series. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.